Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 244. What goes into updating one of the most popular books about working with Python? After a decade of changes in Python's landscape, what projects, libraries, and skills are relevant to an office worker? This week on the show, we speak with previous guest Al Sweigart about the third edition of Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. Al shares his thoughts on teaching Python and writing books over the past decade. In the third edition, he shares several new projects and updates to existing ones. We discuss Python tools for transcription, text-to-speech, notifications, and data storage. We talk about the importance of debugging and improvements to Python error messages. He also shares a collection of resources, including conference talks, small projects, and Python libraries. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Al, welcome back to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been quite a while since I've had you on, and I'm guessing you've been pretty busy. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is I had heard about you heading off to New York for a little while, and I was kind of wondering what you were up to. It seemed like you were doing I don't want to call it a secret project, but you were involved in some sort of project there, and what was happening there?
Right. I was attending a program called the Recurse Center, and this is actually something I found out about, I think maybe 10 years ago at PyCon from someone.
Oh, okay.
It's sort of, I describe it as an artist retreat, but for software developers. So if you have some software project that you want to work on and you want to just be able to come into a location around other people who are working on their projects and sort of you can collaborate with them, or a really common thing is to then abandon your project halfway through the 12-week program and then start on something new, which is what I did.
Okay.
You can do that. And it was really great. You have to apply for it. I think it's recurse.com or recursecenter.com, something like that. But it's free to attend, but it is in Brooklyn. So it's kind of expensive, actually. You have to be in a certain place in your life where you can just up and move somewhere for 3 months. But I found it to be life-changing, actually.
Oh, cool. That's great.
It's a place to meet a bunch of great people, and it gave me a social circle, and it was pretty soon after, I thought, maybe I'll move to New York. I don't know. And after about 4 or 5 days, I thought, I want to move to New York. So, that's been the big change in my life. I'm recording here in Brooklyn, so you'll probably hear sirens or other things in the background on occasion. But it was great. The project I was working on was something I called scroll art, which I gave a few PyCon talks of, I believe, at PyTexas and PyOhio. And essentially, it's sort of like ASCII art, making pictures out of text characters in a text file. Except I use the fact that you can have print function calls inside of a loop to just keep printing out new lines of text in a program. And then eventually all the text will start filling up the window and scrolling everything upwards. It's kind of hard to describe this through a podcast. But you can use this sort of scrolling upward movement to create a kind of animation. And I have several different examples of this at scrollart.org. I find they're really simple and they look kind of old school, but there's a lot of depth that I can go into about different types of things that I can try out. And they also just really make great programming exercises for beginners, because all you need to know about is print and loops and maybe random numbers, little things like that.
Yeah, sure.
And you can make these kind of interesting things. And what I really like about it is we could have been making this back in the 1970s and 80s. You can do this in any programming language. sort of that whole like 10 print hello world, 20 go to 10 sort
Exactly.
of thing.
Yeah. Right.
Except if you change the text around a little bit, you can make a little weird upward scrolling animation. So I have a whole bunch of those at scrollart.org. It's from time to time, I just like to come up with new ideas and try things out.
Yeah. That's a fun one.
Yeah, it was just kind of a nice break from things. But then eventually I had to get back to my job of writing Automate the Boring Stuff, third edition,
All right.
which is coming out next month. There's been a few delays with that, but wow, it's finally coming out here.
That's cool. I think we've talked about almost all of your books past that as far as when I started the podcast. So I think we could kind of maybe dig into a little bit about like what is new in the new edition of the book. And then I also kind of wanted to talk to you about this idea of like what's changed about not only working in Python for the last 10 years, but also trying to teach it or writing programming books in the last decade. I had Michael Kennedy on the show very early on in my first year, and we talked about the 5 years of Talk Python, and I am right on the cusp of the same thing right now with this podcast, which is pretty amazing to have been doing it for 5 years. And so I kind of think of like adding those two together and thinking, okay, gosh, there's like 10 years of like sort of podcasting on this topic and all the things that have changed over that time. So yeah, but maybe we'll start with the book. Are there things that you want to dig into as far as like, what is it you're updating and what are you changing about Automate the Boring Stuff?
Yeah, so this book has always been sort of programming for office workers, I like to say.
Yeah.
Where I wanted to cover Python and just the basics of the language, and then go into a bunch of third-party packages to do interesting things like, sending out emails or text notifications or updating spreadsheets or doing web scraping and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the first half of the book, which just covers the Python language, that hasn't changed too much outside of just basic, maybe copy editing changes, some tightening up the wording.
Okay.
But really, a lot of the additions are to the second part, where I cover new third-party packages. And I mean, the book is now almost 700 pages, and I keep telling myself that, like, oh, this is a book for beginners, and I don't want to frighten people off. But the second part is really a sort of, you can pick and choose what you want to use, so you don't have to read everything in that second half.
Yeah.
But I have taken out some things and shrunk down some sections just because I realized, like, well, this is not really something a beginner needs to know. But I have added a few new things. A lot of them are just sort of AI adjacent things. So I cover the Whisper library to do speech recognition. So you can convert audio files into just text strings. That's been really great. I have a lot of podcasts where I want to just get the transcript of them. And in fact, I'm working on a project with pyvideo.org, which is a place that hosts all of the PyCon recorded talks, just to add transcripts to that. But there's also things that do text to speech, the opposite direction, where you can then have your computer start speaking out words based on text that you give it. There's also just recognizing text from images using Tesseract, doing OCR, optical character recognition.
Yeah.
This is the sort of thing where, like, you can scan a document and you have the image of the text, and you can then extract the text so that you can make it searchable, that sort of thing. And also, I have an entire chapter on SQLite.
Oh, okay.
And covering, it's, as much as you can talk about the whole of relational databases in just one chapter. But I know Simon Willison, who you had on recently, also does a lot of work with SQLite. And I realized, like, wow, this is actually a really powerful thing. It's like a spreadsheet on steroids kind of thing. So, like, a lot of people who might not even be software engineers, they're just dealing with Excel all day. Like, learning the basics of a very simple relational database is something that's really useful. And on top of that, there's other things like sending push notifications to your phone. I talk about parsing XML documents and creating graphs with matplotlib. Mostly, I just want to keep these sort of, just an inch deep, but just to get the reader aware of just how much you can do with a little bit of programming knowledge.
That's cool. I literally just wrote down like 7 things that I want to dig into more. Let me start with the first one. You mentioned the page count is up to this new level. What was the original page count?
I think originally the first edition was somewhere around 500 pages, which
okay.
was still like a pretty huge book. And I think I've just added about like 80 or 100 pages with each new edition.
Now with 50% more.
Yeah. The problem is that I could just work on tiny improvements and changes to this book for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Because I want it to be good, but also done is good. So I'm going to have to eventually stop at some point and say like, okay, I'm just maybe in a 4th edition, I can put this out there.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense.
But yeah, there's just so much that you can do. And a lot of it is a lot easier than you would think. You don't need to have a computer science degree to have access to these abilities to write programs that can sort of be a force multiplier or extend your reach.
That's the thing that I was having a conversation with one of our video instructors. I'm hoping coming back to do a lot more with us. Her name's Jackie Wilson. She, like a lot of us who have maybe worked an office job, when you start to do some programming, you suddenly become this person that has like magical powers.
Yes.
They're like, how did you do that? And like all this sort of stuff. And it's like, Python, it's like, it wasn't that big. To you, it's not that big a deal, but for them, it's like this massive stumbling block of like all these things that, are in the way of them doing it. And in some ways, maybe we'll talk about this more as we go, that barrier of entry of just setting up Python or sharing with someone else your Python code or, distributing things, that to me, just in 5 years that's gotten a lot better and easier with things like UV and other tools like that. I wanted to go back and talk a little more about, because I think you're going to maybe talk about this at PyCon, and I don't want to spoil that, but I feel like some of the Whisper AI audio and video sort of stuff you mentioned there, is that something that you're planning on talking about? I mean, maybe you can just tease a little bit about it.
Oh, yeah. So, I got a talk accepted at PyCon US 2025, which is coming up. It's in a couple months.
Yeah.
Yeah, last year I submitted 5 talk ideas and they all got rejected. And then this year they had a 3 talk proposal maximum, so I submitted 3. And one of them got accepted, so I'm really excited about that. The talk is called "Make Python Talk, Make Python Listen."
Yeah.
So in about 30 minutes, I just want to cover enough about using Whisper to do speech recognition, and then also using PyTTSX3, which I guess stands for Python Text to Speech Extended for Python 3. It has
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, but you can use that for making like text to speech. So you can have your computer actually talk to you. And then I'll also be covering some other things as well, including there's a great third-party package called YTDLP, which I think stands for YouTube Download Program, something like that.
Yeah, okay. Is that the one you're doing the transcript thing sort of with?
Yeah. It will allow you to download videos, not just from YouTube, but a lot of different video and audio websites, so that then you can run the Whisper transcription over the audio of that. And I found that to be really great whenever I have like there are hours and hours of video. I need to be able to just Control F through the the audio of this. How can I do that? And so that's another thing that's like ordinarily without the tools that we have now here in 2025, you'd have to hire an assistant to go through and like make a transcript, or you just going through, and this would just be weeks of work. But now you can have your laptop just do it in a few hours.
Yeah, definitely. I'm intrigued by I think Whisper is amazing. I think that's a really great tool. The one that I'm interested though is the opposite, because this is, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, speaking about this. I tried to go back to school for a little bit, and I decided, okay, well, maybe I'll get an actual degree in computer science and so forth. And it didn't last, but I I had to read some really, really boring books, and I'm terrible with that. And I am much more of a podcast kind of listener type of person. And so I did kind of what you're talking about, like taking PDFs and extracting them into just the pure text and then turning them into speech. And I was using some Apple adjacent tools. It was very, very hacky, and I was doing a lot of it very manually. But it sounds like that's become a lot easier. The one thing I'm intrigued on that, not only just we can talk more about the subject, but the voices were part of it that made it really annoying, and their pronunciations of words and stuff like that. So I wonder if in some ways the TTS, whatever name of text-to-speech tool that you're using, can you choose voices? Has it gotten better as far as pronunciations and things? And
Yeah, I mean, overall, this is an area of computer science where the results have just gotten just drastically better, even, compared to 5 years, 10 years ago. I mean, back around in the 2000s, this same stuff existed, but it was all pretty awful. It wasn't very accurate. But now, what PyTTS X3 does is it's really just a wrapper around your operating system's text-to-speech
okay.
engines.
Right.
So the voices will be different on Microsoft Windows, it'll be different on Mac OS, and it'll be different on Linux. But each of these platforms do offer different voices. You can change the gender or speed or sort of the pitch of a lot of these.
Yeah.
There's really actually not that many settings that you can play around with. But on the other hand, it's really easy to just have 5 lines of Python code be able to just turn a text file into a WAV or an MP3 file.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. It made it easier going through the differences between waterfall and, and other types of stuff.
I mean, one thing that I've tried to keep in mind is I really do like having visuals and diagrams and a picture is worth 1,000 words sort of examples. But another thing that I really want to do one day is dive into how can I make a programming audiobook? Like, I mean, how do you
still consumable?
Talk like how do you speak out loud? All these like open parenthesis, close parenthesis, comma, square bracket, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
but
that's where it fell apart for me.
It would be great if I could just get that tightened down. And I have a few ideas, but not anything so far. So it's one of those like dream projects that I have, along with a programming book that uses very few actual words. So it would be like an IKEA instruction manual, and it just has diagrams and pictures, and you can learn to program that way. And I'm not even sure if that's possible, but it's something that I kind of work on in the back of my head for the last few years.
Yeah, you got to have the little guy with the instructions, like pointing at stuff, and
right, yeah, just holding up the phone and calling IKEA whenever you have problems or something.
Exactly.
But I mean, the really nice thing about that is that when you don't use language, well, then your audience becomes everyone in the world. It's not just, it doesn't have to be translated from English to another language. It's just universally readable in that sense, which is something that I really am getting more and more interested in.
Yeah. No, I get it. Being of a slightly older generation than many of my coworkers, and they're also, I'm one of 2 like Americans that are working for Real Python, which is an interesting thing in general right now. But their use of emojis and other things have been interesting to me. I haven't, inside of like a workplace and so forth, and the way they like to use them inside the video courses and so forth. I kind of see that, this sort of strangely universality of it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely like there's like another layer of like usability you got to kind of think about inside there. And I think that'll be really kind of that sounds like a fun project, but it could be long.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that old saying that like, and I don't even think this is accurate, but where Inuits have 40 words for snow.
Yeah.
But really, when you think about that, we all have 40 words for snow, and we have 16 possible emoji reactions, each with their slightly different meanings, depending on context and everything like that. It's like, language has always been complicated.
Yeah. You mentioned messages briefly as one of the things, actually maybe more notifications, but I guess that can be a form of messaging. Can you mention just briefly, like, what kind of tool are you using in the book for that? And
Yeah, so in the second edition, I had something where I listed various email, SMS, text message gateways for different cell providers where they have an email address sort of system set up where you can email this to in order to send a text message to a specific phone. But
okay,
the problem with that is you have no guarantee that it's been received. You don't know at all if it like worked or if it failed, and even if it did work now, you don't know if it'll work later on. And but that's it's kind of nice as
yeah,
a general way to send text messages that might work. It's really easy because you just have to send an email from your Python script. But new in the third edition, there's a service called ntfy.sh, and I believe the website is ntfy.sh. And this is a very simple HTTP API where so you can just use the request library to send, post, and get requests. And there's also mobile apps that can connect to this, but you can just register for different topics and send and receive messages to that topic. So using this, you can essentially just send short text messages to any internet connected device.
wow.
So in that sense, it's not using the SMS text message protocol, but it's still a way that you could get nice notifications on your phone for like if you're running a script on your laptop and you want to receive a message when it's done, or
Yeah,
you have a computer at home that's constantly scraping the web and you want to get notified whenever somebody posts about a certain topic on I don't know, LinkedIn or Stack Overflow or something like that.
yeah,
What I really like about it is that it's a free service, but they also make the server software available. So if you just want to host it yourself, you can figure out how to do that. And it's just very simple.
wow.
It's really easy to manage. It has a few fancy features, but you can ignore all of that if you want to. And I'm just like really glad that there are people out there who are writing the open source software to make these things possible.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So it's doing that all through, sort of IP stuff. It's not having to go through any kind of like cell network type of infrastructure for SMS or whatever.
Right, exactly. It's as long as you have an internet connection,
Cool.
your device can send and receive these messages.
Very cool. And then you mentioned SQLite, which I love too, because it's the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that it's just a file, which is amazing. And there's so many versions of that probably on your phone right now. Probably every single app that's on your phone has a SQLite database,
Yeah.
stored on your phone, which is pretty amazing. And, the fact that it can have a pretty large amount of data inside of it.
Yeah, I mean, it is on I know Mac OS uses it. I know Android uses it. It's probably the most widely
Yeah.
distributed piece of software application
Yeah.
that's out there, especially because it's not only open source, it's in the public domain,
Yeah.
which is pretty incredible. And mostly I wanted to touch on the topic of databases and relational databases. But the problem is, well, there's all sorts of different flavors of relational database.
Right.
Some of them are open source and some of them aren't. And a lot of them just require setting up the actual database itself, which is such a pain. But with SQLite, it provides you with this database query language, but the database itself is just a file on your
So
computer.
great.
You can just back it up by like making a copy of the database file. It's not an actual application that's running in the background of your computer all the time. And just for people who don't really understand maybe what a relational database is, I really like to explain it as if you think of a spreadsheet that has like columns for like first name and birthday and shoe size or whatever information. And then each row in that spreadsheet is just another entry of a person. There's Jane with a shoe size of 7, and there's Billy who was born in October or whatever. Now, normally with the spreadsheet, if you imagine you have like thousands of rows, you can find stuff in it easily just by doing Control F and then looking for something. But what if you wanted to get say, like, I want to find everybody with a shoe size between 7 and 12 who was also born in April of 1977. You can't really do that easily with just Control F.
Yeah.
So what a lot of relational databases have are a structured query language, and each database kind of has a slightly different dialect, but they're all mostly the same. And so you can write these queries to sort of capture like what kind of data you want to access. And so a relational database is basically the same thing. Each database table has certain columns, and then each of the entries are sort of the rows inside this database table. And then you can capture different information by having different tables in the same database and comparing them with each other as well. It's a really simple idea that just really scales what you can do. I mean, I figure with, Google Sheets or something like that, you can have like a few thousand entries. And SQLite itself gets kind of a bad rap. It's sort of seen as like, well, it's not a real database. You can't have concurrent users. But I've looked into it, and actually, it's a really powerful piece of software.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably, if your website has thousands of visitors simultaneously 24/7, you probably don't want to use it. But I mean, you could power most websites,
Right.
like, I don't know, a dozen or so, or
Right.
even 100 concurrent users. Like, it actually can handle that pretty well. And again, it's the entire database is just in this one file. The SQLite maintainers do a lot of testing. Even their unit tests even simulate like power failure in the middle of writing to the database file and how to recover from that. So it's very solid software.
Yeah.
So I was really glad to be able to cover that in the book.
That's cool. There's a couple things there I wanted to mention. That one is that we've been talking testing a lot lately.
Yeah.
And as far as like testing something like that, it's a really great tool to use because, again, it's just a single file. It can be easily set up on your machine to test it and so forth, or even on in like a web kind of environment or whatever. It doesn't require like its own container and all these other kinds of like elaborate things set up for it, which I think is really nice. I mean, there's definitely ways you can grow into these other larger solutions when you have that problem.
Right.
How are you addressing it? Are you using like the built-in tools inside of Python to talk to SQLite?
Yeah, Python has come with its own SQLite wrapper, I guess. I think since like Python 2.5, it's just really early on they had it in there. And it's something that I feel like a lot of programming tutorials just skip over because it's sort of seen as this elaborate thing. And it can get, you can get pretty deep into working with databases and stuff. But again, what I try to capture with Automate the Boring Stuff is finding the things where you just have to know these few things, and that allows you to do 80% of what you can get done.
Yeah.
Because, you don't have to learn everything about programming or about all of these different software concepts and in order to make really practical things. I know I talk a lot with Dave Beasley, who also gives a lot of talks at PyCon.
Yeah.
We both sort of pine for the earlier days of computing when software was very simple and there weren't a dozen different JavaScript frameworks that you had to learn. And, like, oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if the whole database was just in one file and you could just like copy it. Yeah. And so like, it's such a breath of fresh air to have something like SQLite that still follows by that idea and can deliver so much without becoming burdened with 10 million features that you don't really need to know.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And I think that's one of the reasons that your book is so popular. And, I had Eric Maths on recently, and his book is very popular too, partly because I'm not going to try to teach you every single thing about this stuff. Let's get to the point where you're doing stuff with it.
Yes.
And then you can kind of go and learn like the intricacies of all this other stuff. I don't need to explain the 17 different ways that you could use this thing, because that's important to me as a teacher, that I can show off that I know all that stuff. It's like, I want you, the individual, the student, to actually start playing with this stuff. And then you can say, well, what if I wanted to? And I do know that too. That's where that kind of comes in. And I feel like that's a problem with education very often that people kind of get caught up in, is that, there are so many different ways, and you're kind of then fiddling with stuff as opposed to actually building. And so I definitely appreciate that in what you're doing.
Yeah, a lot of teaching is figuring out what you're not going to mention
Right.
and just get by it. Because I feel like a lot of people who can do really can't teach, to sort of turn that saying on its head. Because
Yeah.
especially as you learn more about programming, and there's so many bits of software that make it easier to write software, or other techniques that sort of add another layer of abstraction and allow you to do more things. And it's really great to learn about these things, and you can get really excited about it. So when you start teaching programming to other people, you want to tell them about all these super complicated things.
Right.
I will always remember this one friend of mine. Yeah, he worked at Google. He was a very smart guy, and he was teaching a brand new person programming, and he decided to start with recursive functions.
Wow.
And I thought, like, that's terrible. It's like, what? And it's sort of like,
Yeah.
because, as a student, you're constantly asking, what can I do with this knowledge exactly?
Right.
And, it helps to have this strong basis in theory and computer science to do all of these really cool things. Like if you want to design your own programming language, recursion is a very necessary
Sure.
topic that you have to understand. But, most of us aren't going to be designing our own programming languages anytime soon.
Yeah.
It's really hard to just keep simple things simple.
Yeah. How did your recursion book do? It's been a long time since we've had that conversation.
Yeah, it's been doing well. It's not selling as much as Automate the Boring Stuff
Sure. Yeah.
with Python, of course. But yeah, the feedback I'm getting from it is pretty good. This is the recursive book of recursion, where I was looking around at the time, and I thought, like, well, everybody is teaching recursion in the exact same way that we all learned it in our computer science undergrad classes from professors who have sort of been teaching it the same way, where it's so obvious that this kind of came out of the mathematics department of universities and then just went into computer science departments the same way. And I I could talk for hours and hours about the problems of how we teach computer science.
Right.
And especially because, whenever you see like CS professors with PowerPoint slides that have Greek letters for the variable names. And I thought, like, yeah, you can't type that on a QWERTY keyboard.
Right.
So, like, how am I supposed to run this pseudocode of yours? But, recursion is often like, well, let's start by talking about Fibonacci and factorial, even though in the real world, you would actually never want to use recursion for those two algorithms. So I tried to think, like, okay, what makes recursion such an intimidating topic for beginners? And then on and off again, after over 5 years, I had a book.
There you go.
It was really funny. I mean, I keep thinking, like, yeah, it only took me about 1.5 years to write that book. And then I go back through my notes and I realize, like, no, I've been working on this since 2018.
Yeah. One of the things that we thought about kind of digging into, again, is this idea of, a decade of doing this, of writing these books. And I guess one of the first things I want to start maybe at the end. Do you see a change, and maybe this happens, of people coming up to you or emails you get, or, you're at a conference, and I know you often go to like they'll have a booth for the books from No Starch or whatever. But do you see a change in the type of readers that are buying your books? Like demographics, like, like if you do like a survey of Python developers, there's like this large percentage of, 20, 25, 30% that have only been doing Python for 1.5 years or 2 years or something like that. But do you personally see a change in that?
I don't have any concrete numbers, but just from the vibes, I would say that probably it hasn't really changed all that much. I mean, computing has always been this sort of mysterious superpower. And going back to like the 90s, like, oh, Bill Gates was sort of like, oh, he's the uber nerd who is the best at programming, and that's why he became such a rich person or something like that.
Right.
And of course, these ideas are very silly. But, a lot of people don't know what goes into writing software. And they just see like, oh, Bill Gates became really rich. And then later we moved on into like the 2000s with social media. And we're like, oh, Mark Zuckerberg became really rich. So he must be very smart and good at programming. And over again, we see that. And especially now with AI and large language models like ChatGPT coming out, again, that whole magic, indistinguishable from magic sort of feeling has just increased even more. But I feel like the people who are learning to program now in 2025 are pretty much the same type of person in 2015. It's
okay.
You have heard about programming, and I remember when I was a kid, adults would always say the exact same thing, like, oh, computers are the wave of the future. They really love that term, that specific phrase.
The thing from the movie The Graduate, plastics.
Yes,
the future.
exactly. And it's sort of, we're all just sort of repeating things that we heard other people say, even not really knowing about that. And that is especially true with computing, even if you are a professional and you've been doing this as a career. There's a whole lot of opinions that are kind of half remembered bits of bad advice, I guess. But yeah, I feel like, one of the things I've always said is that the worst thing about learning to code now as compared to when I did it as a kid in the 90s is that the expectations are just so much higher right now. I mean,
what do you mean by that?
So, like, back in the 90s, if you're like, I want to make a video game, the professional video games were like Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo, or those sort of like two-dimensional graphics sort of things. And they were fairly simple. But like these days, we have AAA game studios that have $200 million budgets for these video games. They're like on the scale of Hollywood movies or even more so. And, I remember I would teach like this Saturday morning kids programming class, and we would just be using this tool called Scratch. And I'd say like, hey, let's make a little video game. What do you want to make? And the kids would say, Minecraft.
Right,
I thought we have 90 minutes. So how about let's make something a little simpler? But it was really nice when I was learning to code because I could just sort of mess around with things, and I didn't have this expectation that I was supposed to create like an AI assistant or a social media website with 20 million users by next week.
Yeah, I can see that. I have a couple of interesting counter examples that kind of, they don't completely rebalance the scales, but it's been interesting to watch the indie space, if you will, things like Vampire Survivors. I don't know if you're familiar with that game.
Oh, yeah.
It's, literally you control everything with one stick of a joystick, which feels very, very Atari-esque in the sense that, okay, as far as controls, it's very simple in a way. The success of Balatro, which even the creator of that game is popular and it's won all these accolades and so forth. He's like,
I've stayed away from Balatro just because I've heard how addictive it is.
I've heard too, because he's like, he said himself, it's like, I don't know, I would have given the game a 7, but it's so popular. Like, so there are these sort of timeless things. You just kind of have to look at them a little differently. And I think there is a desire in some ways for some simplicity. It just has to be novel, in kind of creative ways. But I hear what you're saying, like, the kids that are in Roblox or Minecraft or whatever, like sometimes the expectations of a video game, if you break out the old arcade games of our youth, they're going to be like, huh?
Right, exactly.
It's only going to give them like 5 minutes of time.
Yeah. I mean, indie game developers are having to sort of take a different strategy because they can't compete with $100 million budgets. And what I do notice that with a lot of indie games that are really popular, like Balatro or Stardew Valley or Undertale and all these other games that are actually really fun, is that it's not the coding that is the most important part. It's sort of asking, hey, is this game actually fun? Who cares about all the 3D graphics and physics engines and everything else? Like, well, is this game actually fun to play? And it turns out you don't need very good graphics or, something that requires the latest graphics card to render in order to have something that's simple and a lot of people can appreciate.
Yeah.
And it's also, I did read this one blog post where this person was complaining about all the low quality games that they found on Steam. And, you can find these games if you want to, but for the most part, the algorithm never really brings them up to the surface.
Right.
But, I would like to point out that, like, well, experienced game developers have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And they come from people who were just starting out at some point, and they were making games that probably weren't that fun, that were kind of buggy. But, these days, if you like, oh, I want to like, hey, make these little like games or like little apps or something, we have the Steam marketplace, or we have the App Store
Right.
that you can start publishing these things. And, probably absolutely no one will download it. There's always these articles about how like 95% of the games on Steam or apps on app stores have less than one download per week or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But, people have to start from somewhere.
There'll be occasionally the weird Flappy Bird kind of thing or other kinds of things pop out. But yeah, I agree. But I mean, it's neat that, again, that you can get your stuff out there. So kind of going back to the idea of, a decade of writing programming books, what would you say are some of the lessons? Do you have an idea of like, what were revelations, and did that change the way that you approached updating Automate the Boring Stuff?
Oh, wow. It's mostly been about 10 million small details that I've learned. I mean, I can give an example. Like in the first edition of Automate the Boring Stuff, I use the metaphor of boxes with labels on them for variables. So, if you have the line of code spam equals 42, I explain it with a picture of like, 42 on a piece of paper, and that piece of paper is going into a cardboard box labeled spam. And the thing is, this metaphor works pretty nicely until you get to lists and mutable data types. And then, I kind of had this tortured metaphor of like, well, now you're actually storing a reference to another thing here. But really, when you look at the Python data model, and I gave a talk about this, I think in like 2018 PyCascades, called The Amazing Mutable and Immutable Tuple and Other Philosophical Digressions. That talk was basically entirely about the Python data model and how, well, actually everything is a reference in Python, and no variable actually contains the data itself, even the primitive types like integers and bools, and sort of what that means and how that should affect your mental model of it. And so I've made a switch away. I still bring up boxes, but then I also say like, well, also you can think of it as name tags that you attach to the values, which works for both mutable and immutable data types. And it's a little bit better. And so it's a lot of like these small, like, how can I explain this thing? I mean, I constantly call like, functions are like a mini program within your program, because that makes sense. Like when you shut down your program and it exits, all the variables lose their information. And so functions are kind of the same way, where local variables, when the function returns, all the local variables lose all of their data as well. And just trying to come up with different ways to explain things. And I've gotten really good at explaining basic programming concepts this way.
That's good, yeah.
But then when people say like, hey, I like your books, can you write a book on machine learning or on pandas? And like, I actually don't know anything about that. So
yeah,
there's so many things that are on my to learn list right now that I've just been busy writing books and other things. So I feel like I'm an expert at beginner concepts.
That's funny. So there's not a data and science book crying to come out of you. You're like I want to do this right now.
Right. Yeah. I'm not designing my own programming language yet, anyway.
Have you decided to teach things in a different order at all? Were there things that you felt like did not work with beginners?
Yeah, I've definitely tried to push up when I introduce the debugger.
Okay.
This is like, debugging is one of those things where it's sort of like documentation or unit tests, where everybody always kind of puts it at the end after everything.
Yeah.
And I feel like, well, it takes a little bit to learn how to use a debugger and how to step through your program. But once you're able to do that, you can debug your programs so much easier. You can run the code one line at a time and really see how things are changing. And that is so much better than just sort of sprinkling print function calls everywhere and rerunning the program. And really, I wish I could have it as like chapter 2 almost, like right after covering the REPL. But I do like to cover other things. But
what do you like to use to teach the debugger? What type of tool do you use for showing it off?
Oh, because my book sort of assumes that you're either using sort of idle or the Mu code editor. But I explained this in the book as well. Like all debuggers are basically the same. They have like a step into, step over, continue button, that sort of thing. So even if you're using Visual Studio Code, this is all the exact same. But it's such a great skill to have. But when you going back like over the last several decades, if you look at programming books over the years, they always seem to have debugging and logging and all of this stuff as like, oh, that's like a nice to have, and so they'll put it at the end. But I really want to say like, no, this is actually important, and I want that reflected in how early you learn it. So I think the debugging chapter is now chapter 5 in the 3rd edition.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of an amazing way to truly see scope. We have like a short little video course. Maybe I'll link it on this episode as one of the, I do this video course spotlight. We had a course that kind of showed that, like when you're running this, you can actually see the variables. I don't know if he was using Mu, he was using Thonny, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Which has a kind of a nice tool for kind of giving that visualization of like, okay, what's local, what's enclosing, built in, and global. It's a nice way of seeing all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I agree that leaving those things as almost like appendixes is kind of strange, in some ways. That it's good to be able to have tools that let you play with your code and understand very early on. I definitely love Python itself. Even the last 5 years, there's been this focus on showing you what the errors mean in the new versions of Python, which is really, really great.
Right.
That the better error messages is just...
Yeah, I love them so much.
Yeah, it's such a great enhancement.
I've always said that programmers write error messages with the idea that nobody will ever actually read them.
Right.
And that's how you get error messages that are just like EOL termination string, blah, 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 something like that, where it's
Right.
like, what does that actually mean? And it's always awkward to have to explain to beginners like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to actually know what that means. You just have to Google it and then find out what it actually means. It's like, well, why don't you just write what it means to begin with?
Yeah, why does it got to be like this weird priesthood of like understanding this sort of stuff? So I like that approach, and I definitely think it opens up the language a little bit more. This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It's a different type of video course. Instead of being based on one of our written tutorials, it's a conversation about code. And in this case, I mentioned it when we started to talk about debugging. It digs into how scope works within Python and what a closure is. The video course is titled Exploring Scopes and Closures in Python, and the instructor for the code conversation is previous guest and Real Python team member Martin Broyce. And he takes you through clarifying code by refactoring with descriptive names, how functions access variables in local and non-local scopes, how inner and outer function calls access scopes, how to debug a project and its scope using the Thonny editor, and inspecting closures, dunder code, and cell objects. You also take a deep dive into the inner workings of Python by inspecting dunder objects to find out how Python handles and stores variables. Like most of the video courses on Real Python, the course is broken into easily consumable sections, and all Real Python courses have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the search tool on realpython.com. Are there other things that you feel that you've learned or changed in how you approach teaching in Python?
I definitely try to lean heavily on simple projects.
Yeah.
You can't just sort of talk concepts at a person and, they'll listen along and then they'll nod their head and be like, oh, okay, that sounds great. But unless they can do something, with it.
Yeah.
They're really not learning anything at all. And one problem that I really have with a lot of tutorials is they'll talk about something, and I just really wish I could just always say, could you give me an example?
Yeah.
Because what you're doing essentially as somebody who's trying to teach is taking this complicated web of associations and facts and knowledge that you have in your brain, and then trying to serialize that into a stream of words that you speak or you write. And then somebody has to then read that stream of words and then recreate that mental model in their head.
Yeah.
And so much can get lost in translation with that. And I feel like a lot of times we don't realize that is essentially what we're having to do when we write books. I mean, that's why I try to involve a lot of pictures and diagrams as well, because, you could use all of these different words and you have no idea if people are understanding the meaning of those words in the way that you have the understanding of the meaning of those words.
That kind of takes me to AI briefly, in a sense that that is the number one skill that you still have to have, which is explaining very, very detailed, what you are wanting this thing to do. And that may take multiple rephrasings or whatever. And my conversation with Simon Willison was kind of enlightening, about how often he will, try this again, or, literally learning that skill of prompting, I think is really funny, just kind of like watching all that. But it is like another, I don't know, inversion of that translation, if you will, of what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's something that we're not really taught how to do. That's something when you learn to program, you realize I have to speak this computer's language exactly.
Yeah.
Because the computer will do exactly what you tell it to. It can't read your mind. And whereas, in the real world, I'm a human and I'm talking to another human, and I can kind of be vague because I understand that we have this shared understanding, especially if we're in the same culture and speaking the same language.
Yeah.
Like, I can be a bit vague, but you'll generally know what I mean. But when you're talking to LLMs, it really kind of, you have some of that. It's not like you have to write a program in a programming language,
Yeah.
but you do have to be very exact. Otherwise, the results that you get back are going to be very generic and vague, or often just completely wrong.
Yeah.
So just probably a lot of people know what rubber duck debugging is. It's this idea that as you're learning to program, just have a rubber duck or some inanimate object on your desk. And if you have a problem, first try to explain your problem to the rubber duck. And this will force you to articulate and verbalize what your problem is. And probably just by doing that and putting your thoughts to words, you can probably figure out what's wrong with it. And the nice thing is, LLMs are sort of a rubber duck that can talk back to you.
Right.
Which is kind of disturbing.
Yeah.
And also LLMs will sometimes lie to you, which is also very disturbing. But I keep going back and forth on, should beginners be using ChatGPT to learn how to code? Because I always say, like, well, okay, sure, but you always have to remember to double check everything it says and remember that it can get things wrong. But the thing is, beginners will always say, like, yeah, I'll do that. But of course they never do. We're so used to just, we have a teacher tell us something and we believe them,
right,
because they told us this thing, and we trust them in general until we have enough evidence to not trust them.
Yeah.
And I really like Simon Willison's advice of, when you start with an LLM, get it to tell you a lie or something that is wrong, and that'll really deflate this idea that we have of these AIs as omniscient, hyper intelligent computer beings or something like that. It's like, no, this is it's more than just autocomplete. They get things wrong all the time because they're just kind of, they literally don't know what they're talking about. They're just talking.
Right. Well, cool. You're finishing up. When do you expect the book to come out, or is it already out?
So it's coming out in April of this year. So just in about a month.
Okay, shortly.
You can go to nostarch.com, and I believe they have like a 25% off pre-order code that you can use if you want to order it beforehand. What's really nice about No Starch Press, I've really liked working with them over the last decade, but when you buy from their website as opposed to Amazon or something, they'll give you DRM-free ebook copies.
Yeah.
Just included with the print book that you buy, which is always nice because, I like having a solid physical book in my hands, but I also like Control F to be able to look through things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this. This is something that's kind of been this huge project that I've been working on. I thought it was going to come out last year, and then there were delays and things like that. But it's really great, especially now because AI is continuing to be this sort of overhyped thing. And a lot of people have this really deep misconception of, oh, well, you don't have to learn how to code because in the future, AI is going to be creating all of our software for us. And what's great about learning history is, for the last 40 years, like you can go back to the 1980s and there'll be Time magazine articles where they say like, oh, well, actually people don't have to learn to code because we have this new thing. And like, I remember in the 2000s, UML was going to be the thing that replaced expensive software engineers, the unified modeling language. It was like these little diagrams that you could make of like your Java classes or things like that. And then we said like, well, we'll have software that can
just parse it,
transform these UML diagrams into working software. And it's like, yeah, that's a lot of hand waving there. And of course, nobody even knows what UML stands for anymore.
Yeah.
So this idea that like, oh no, like, well, it's also like kind of sad and worrisome because I'll just be on the internet and people will actively be saying, I'm gonna give up learning how to code because I feel like there's no future in this. And, there's always the risk that even though AI can't replace software engineers, your boss might think it can and lay you off anyway, or just use AI as the excuse to fire you for trying to form a union in your workplace or something like that. But, that also happened with sort of offshoring software jobs back in the 2000s. And It turned out like, oh, we thought it was this clever hack that could cut our labor expenses. But it turns out that having a remote team 12 time zones away does not improve your efficiency all that much to make it worth it. And
I think there's going to be some wake up calls here for people.
Yeah. There's just so many people, and it's also just really annoying because people who really don't know the capabilities and limitations of LLMs will very confidently be telling you that, oh yeah, we're going to replace you. Like, we won't have software developers or radiologists or lawyers. Somehow we can never replace CEOs with AIs though, for some reason.
Yeah.
No. We'll always need very smart people to do that job. I just want to say that, like, actually I know, like, I said earlier about like dozens of JavaScript frameworks and how complicated things are, but really at the same time, it's never been easier to learn how to program and also how to write programs that do really cool things. There's a lot of third-party packages out there. And so that's kind of what I try to capture with the third edition is this idea that like you can still empower yourself, even if you're not a software developer, you're just somebody who works with Excel spreadsheets all day.
Yeah.
A little bit of coding knowledge can really help you.
Yeah, sharing stuff. We talked quite a bit about it on my episode with Charlie Marsh, the inline metadata thing, as far as like sharing your scripts and, having that project, be able to share it with someone else in your office, and that stuff is great.
Oh, yeah. I just read that PEP the other day. PEP 7.3 something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I always forget it. Yeah.
But I read it and I was like, why would we need this? This is more complicated stuff. And then I read through it some more. I thought, oh, actually, yeah, this is a good idea. Which is sort of the problem with software is we start coming up with software to help write our software. And then it becomes a little bit more complicated and inscrutable to beginners. But what I really like about Python is that it's still, even in, as of, with 3.14, like it's still a pretty easy programming language to pick up, and you don't have to learn everything. You can get by pretty, like with, just 20% of the language.
Yeah, I love that about it. Well, cool. It's been a while, but I always like to ask everybody these questions when they're on. And so what's something that you're excited about in the world of Python right now?
Oh man, I think I give this answer every time I'm on the Real Python podcast, but I am really excited about PyCon US coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be in Pittsburgh again this year. They're usually like in the same city twice, so it was in Pittsburgh last year, and now that I'm in New York, I can just take Amtrak there.
Wow.
It's like 9 hours, so it's probably a bit long, but I always like having the extra space to sort of like spread out and just have my laptop out, and there's always something interesting to look out the window with. But yeah, especially this year because I have a talk that was accepted, and I realized that PyCon US is I've made so many friends in the Python community, and this is sort of the one time a year where I can see everybody there. And I really want to encourage everybody to sign up and attend, because you don't have to be an expert. I feel like the Python community is the friendliest to beginners community I've ever found. I mean, the first conference I ever went to was PyCon in like 2012, 2013, something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought like, wow, this is great. I should go to more tech conferences. And then I went to other tech conferences and I realized that they weren't as good. They were just sort of missing that community feel.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to like meet like all the people I already know, but also try to meet a whole bunch of new people as well. And I always tell people like, you don't have to see a talk at every single time slot. You can just hang out with people, because when else are you going to be around 3,000 other Python programmers at the same time?
Yeah.
So definitely like I'll just be around the conference center. Say hi to me. I think No Starch Press might have a booth there. I mean, I also like hanging out with Russ at the Beware booth.
Yeah.
And just having lunch with random people. It's always great.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I had a great experience in Salt Lake City those 2 years. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it this year. I'm still like holding out hope, but we'll see. But yeah, it should be pretty great. And it's great that you can take a train there. That's amazing. So the next one is, what's something that you want to learn next? It, again, doesn't have to be programming related. It can be anything else you're interested in.
Oh, man. So I know I've been saying I'm going to learn Rust basically for the last 5 or 6 years, I think now. What's really nice is that Rust as a language has kind of matured and settled down. So I don't have to like relearn new things. But I mean, there's just so much going on in the world where like a lot of Python tools are being written in Rust. I mean, you had Charlie Marsh talking about his work doing that. And so it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it'd be great to sort of learn that as well. And I even had like some ideas for like a Rust book, or maybe like a Rust projects book, similar to like my book, The Big Book of Small Python Projects. I could have the Big Book of Small Rust Projects, but I also have a bunch of other programming languages I kind of want to explore in that same vein. But recently, TypeScript has announced that they're rewriting their compiler in Go, and that it's just had like a 10x improvement in performance because of that. I think originally it was written in JavaScript. But yeah, just there's always so much to learn. Mostly, I just kind of want to explore New York more. It's my entire life. It's, I went to New York on a family trip when I was like 8 years old. And I remember the Empire State Building observation deck and like waiting in line to visit the Statue of Liberty and that sort of thing. But just like now living here, and I like, oh, this city that only existed on TV and in movies. Like, no, I'm actually here right now.
Yeah.
I have this one story. I was walking through Brooklyn, and there's a lot of Hasidic Jews who live here, and the ones who like wear the formal all black gear and everything. And it was raining this day, and I was walking outside, and I saw one guy who had like a dollar store shower cap over his hat to protect it from the rain. And I just love that, because it's such a simple and practical solution. But this is sort of like a detail that I would never know unless I lived here. And no matter where I live, I love finding these like little details that you really only pick up on when you're just around in the community so much.
Yeah. I love going there just for the food. So
oh yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, what would you say is the best way people can follow your work online?
So you can find me. I'm on Mastodon and B-Sky. I'm usually Al Sweigart. Probably the best way to find me is inventwithpython.com. That's where I put all of my books online for free under a Creative Commons license. So you can check that out. But yeah, I'd love to hear from people. It's always great to get emails. I'm al@inventwithpython.com. I should probably also register AI at inventwithpython.com just because that lowercase l kind of gets confused for in uppercase I. But it'd be great to hear from people.
Hey, it was fantastic to talk to you again, and thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Al Sweigart for coming back on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python Podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python Podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.